Well, church, good morning once again. I have to tell y'all, this is one of those really good Sundays that, I believe that the Lord is at work in this place and will do things in this message that I could not even begin to understand. But no matter what else happens, we've already had a good Sunday. And there's some beauty in that. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Pastor Anne Marie. I'm the associate pastor here at First United Methodist Church of Colleyville, and we are so delighted that you have decided to join us in our 11:11 worship service this Sunday. This Sunday, we finish our 3-week series all about rest. We have been talking about what it means to be a disciple, how part of that makeup, that DNA of what it means, is to include rest, how God has created us on the Sabbath to stop and delight, and how today we can talk about how we find that increased spiritual awareness, that rest, by not just saving it for one day of the week on the Sabbath, but instead finding ways to connect with God in those restful moments each and every day. And so because we are all disciples here, we are people who are committed to learning and growing the rest of our lives. Disciple comes from that word student, so that means that we have to be lifelong learners. And so if you're anything like me, maybe there are some ways that you really like to learn. And there are some ways that maybe you could do without. So for me, there's one way that I really like to learn how to do something new. If there's a certain characteristic or something I really want to develop in my own life, I know there's all of those podcasts and interviews and articles and even TikToks, if that's your thing. My favorite way to learn how to do something new is to read biographies. Because then you get somebody not just doing that thing, but providing kind of a model of what it might mean to incorporate whatever that skill or characteristic or moral is into your own life as well. So that's the reason why I've read books like Kate Bowler's No Cure for Being Human, Beth Moore's All My Knotted Up Life, and Bishop Michael Curry's Love is the Way. They all had characteristics that I hope to one day implement as I learned from their example, through their own words, their own stories, what it meant to them to live out those things I was hoping to also engage in. But when we're talking about what it means to find rest, when we're talking about what it means to find someone who really knows what it means to get away from the hustle of life, to take a breath and step back, to put things in perspective, to have a habit of creating rest, there's one biography that I think is essential to learning that skill. We call it the Gospel of Mark. So this tells us the story of Jesus' life, because it turns out that there's no one better at finding rest than Jesus. And the Gospel of Mark is structured not unlike one of those Greek biographies that were also coming to fruition around the same time. Like depictions of Socrates or Julius Caesar, the Gospel of Mark shows Jesus accomplishing great tasks. But it also shows him what would be an average day. And so this morning, we're going to take a look at that small piece of that biography, the Gospel of Mark. A day in the life of Christ, at the very beginning of his ministry, and see what makes Jesus a master of rest, and maybe how we can make it a daily practice as well. So from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 1, verse 35 through 39. It says, "In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, 'Everyone is searching for you.' He answered, 'Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also. For that is what I came out to do.' And he went all throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons." So Jesus has began his ministry. He's gone out and announced the good news. He's been baptized. He's been tempted. He's gone out and called disciples, taught in the synagogues, healed and cast out demons. He's touched crowds and crowds of people, hoping for just a little bit of that healing. And we're still in the first chapter of the Gospel of Mark. All of that has happened. So he's accomplishing a lot of things, and the more things he seems to do, the more things there seem to be to get done. I don't know if you've ever had a day like this, but I have a really good life hack for it. You might have heard it before. If you have a lot to do and you're feeling kind of overwhelmed, you take a look at your list, all those things you got to do, you add something you've already done, and then you mark that off. You'll feel a lot better, trust me. But Jesus finds himself in that place where there seems to be more and more things to do, because do you know what happens if it gets out in town that someone can heal illnesses? Who shows up at your door? Everyone. That's right. And that's the position that Jesus has been in. All night, people have been coming to him, asking for healing, asking for hope, asking for good news, things that Jesus is equipped and able to give them. But he gets tired. And at the end of the night, he recedes to prayer. He's gone out in silence to find rest and communion with his Father. And it says there in verse 35, in the morning, while it was still dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. But he doesn't stay in that deserted place alone very long. Because who comes barreling over but in verse 36, and Simon and his companions hunted for him. And I love these words the translator used here, that Simon and his companions hunted for him, but it almost kind of cuts away at what they were really doing. Commentary writers say that they were urgently seeking him out. They were running after him. They had to find him because that crowd that had gathered together that night before to get a little bit of Jesus' time and healing and good news had gathered back again. And so they come out to find Jesus because do they know how much work there is to do? This is not a time to rest, Jesus. We have things, good things to accomplish. And I wonder if that sounds a little bit like us. I'm guessing a few of us have so much on our plates that we maybe make a habit of doing that thing, of adding an extra thing to our list and crossing it off, even though we've already done it. So many of us have so many good things in our lives that we are able to attest to the fact that there is too much of a good thing. I haven't found that true with desserts yet, but I believe one day I might. So we find ourselves surrounded by the demands of our schedule, our work, our families, our communities, that we end up doing just whatever is before us without too much thought because we simply don't have that much more time to put into it. And that was the position that John Mark Comer found himself in when he met with his mentor, John Ortberg. So y'all know I've mentioned this book a couple of times, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. It went into the inspiration for this series. I'm sure you're not surprised. But he was running a large church, but it had started out small, something manageable that he could do. And over the course of just a few years, he became a mega church pastor. He taught 6 services a week. He was a spiritual leader and a CEO, and he was barely 30. And so he met with his mentor and said, my spiritual life is hurting. In the midst of all of these things to do, something is falling away. And it's the one that I know shouldn't. And now maybe y'all are secretly mega church pastors and you haven't told me yet. But I'm guessing that we're not. But if you're anybody here who has gone from one job to another with more responsibility, who has gone from a life alone to a life with a partner, who's gone from life without kids to life with 2 kids, or caring for aging parents, or adding other responsibilities in the community, or any number of things, you know that all the things you have to do, your life that seems so manageable, can be full to bursting in what seems like a blink of an eye. And so in the midst of all that busyness, John Mark Comer comes to his mentor and says that his spiritual life is hurting, and his mentor shares something that his mentor had said to him. If you're wondering if one of the points of this message is to find a mentor, it's not a bad thing to be thinking, okay? So he says, if you want to be that person you want to be connected spiritually, to be living out your values, to be working from a place of wholeheartedness and an awareness of God, He says you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. He goes on to say that for many of us, the great danger is not that we will renounce our faith. It is that we will become so distracted and rushed and preoccupied that we will settle for a mediocre version of it, that we will skim our lives instead of actually living them. And that's the exact opposite of what we find Jesus doing. After the craziness of that day of teaching and healing and connecting, he finds rest in prayer. He goes to God, his Father, and just sits a while. And that's not something that just happens in this few verses in the Gospel of Mark. It happens all over the Gospels. It happens all over the letters telling about the story of Jesus' life. Jesus was known as someone who took the longer way to get somewhere, who took naps in the middle of storms, who constantly went to the mountainside alone to find rest in prayer with God. He had a lot of work to do. Holy, busy, good work. But he wasn't known for being hurried. And it's because of that practice of slowing down, of connecting in prayer, that Jesus was able to determine what out of his long list of things to do, what was his to do. Because the disciples come to him with more and more, ready to set up shop in Capernaum, that town where they were. Because they could just stay there. Jesus could be that holy healer man set up in Capernaum, and people would come to him far and wide to receive that good news. But instead, Jesus recognizes all there is to do from that knowledge and wisdom that came from slowing down and connecting with God. He was able to say, no, it's time to move on. In verse 37, it says, when they found him, they said to him, everyone is searching for you. He answered, let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also. For that is what I came out to do. And there he went throughout all of Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. Slowing down, connecting with God in prayer, taking those moments, allows us to recognize whose voice we're following. And I wonder, how well are we able to distinguish that voice of God? We live in kind of a loud world, a world with a lot of voices telling us what to do next. And most of those voices are good. They have voices telling us to do good things, just like the disciples. Simon Peter, I think he gets a bad rep. I think he tries so hard, and it's not his fault that he tries hard at the wrong things. But what he's telling Jesus to do is not wrong. To go and meet those people's needs, to offer them healing and wholeness and new life. To be in Capernaum, to meet those needs there. I can't imagine it was easy to walk away from so many Jesus could have made a difference for. Those crowds had gathered to see him. But he moved with decisiveness, knowing that he could not do everything. That as fully God, but fully man, he had limitations on where he could be and what he could do and how much of all of it. So in the midst of all things that he could do, he decided what was most important because of that communication and slowing down with God. And that's one of the gifts that rest each day gives us. It reminds us who we are and what in all of the list of the things that we could do, it reminds us what we need to do. It gave Jesus the ability to see through the urgency of the disciples, the ability to turn down some of the tasks in front of him, that he might be best used for the kingdom. Because just like Jesus, we also won't be able to do it all. But with the help of God, through rest in prayer, we might be able to do what is most important. But that doesn't happen without us slowing down. And so John Mark Comer offers a list of practical ways to tangibly slow down the pace of our lives, a way to make ourselves wait more often, that we might find ways to connect with God in our average moments. And I have to tell y'all, we're going to put a list on the screen. These are awful. These are not how I want to spend most of my time. Getting into the slow lane, choosing the longest checkout line in the grocery store, that might go against my understanding of what it means to be me. But John Mark Comer says these are ways that we can take our life and let it go just a little bit slower. Not for the sake of being slow, but so that in those moments we might find a little bit of pause. In those moments of pause, we might be looking for God. Because it's things like this that slow us down. Things like this that allow us to look up and look around every once in a while. It's this speed of life, this slowing down that Jesus calls us to, that invites us to practice, to have that greater sense of connection, living at that pace of love through all that we have to do. One of my favorite moments in seminary came from my intro to worship class. And the professor asked us to do something I found a little bit strange. He asked us to pull out a piece of paper and to write down all of the roles that we had in our lives. All the things that we were supposed to do, the things that made us who we were. Things like, for folks in that grad school, youth leader, or this certain job, or worship assistant, or Starbucks barista, or whatever, going on and on and on, all of the jobs that we had. And then he asked us to add to that list all of the other roles that we play in our lives. Roles like sister, or brother, or partner, or friend, or spouse, or parent, child, and so on. And then he asked us to take a look at that list and to rank those roles in order of importance. What mattered the most? What do we need to invest in the most? Now, if you have a group of seminarians together in a class, we have been to Sunday school enough times to know there is a right answer to every question. The answer is Jesus, right? And so we knew to put a disciple, child of God, follower of Christ, to put that as number one. We knew that was the right answer. But our professor told us that we were actually wrong, that he had set up that question unfairly, that the way that we think of ourselves as being a person of God, a follower of Christ, is not the most important role of our life. It's the role through which we do everything else. So it wasn't really meant to be a list with disciple at the top. It was meant to be a circle with disciple at the middle, through which we were all of those other things. A parent or a student or a friend or a sibling or a boss or an employee, all of those things were founded on our understanding of what it meant to follow after God. And when we do these things, when we slow down, when we practice that prayer, when we invite God into the midst of our daily lives, we are reminding ourselves what Emmy knew when she was baptized. That our first name is not the name given to us when we're born. It's beloved. It's child of God. And from that name, we become everything else. When we live into that awareness, all of the moments of our life are free to find rest. All of the moments of our life can become holy. We live knowing that God is here with us. And in God we find rest. May it ever be so. Amen.